Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
Welcome to our program. On this particular program, we're going to deal with the Education International Conference, which was held this summer in Portoalegre, Brazil. And we're very fortunate to have one of the representatives at that conference with us. It was a worldwide conference on, of course, a very important subject, education. Welcome to the program, Joanne Harvey. She is an educator in the Coeur d'Alene School District, and she has held many prominent positions. She's very active in the Idaho Education Association, the National Education Association. In fact, she chairs the National Education Committee for Native American Affairs. She's also on the board of the Human Rights Education Institute, and she's vice president of the board for the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations. I have worked with Joanne Harvey for many years, and she is a remarkable person, and we welcome you and thank you for being with us on this program.
Thank you, Tony.
And I'm so pleased to have our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, an attorney in the state of Idaho, and Erna Reinhardt, director of public relations at North Idaho College. And as is traditional, Janelle will commence the questioning.
Joanne, welcome to our program today. What is Education International? What is that organization?
Well, it's an organization that represents all of the teaching professions in the world, and it is best represented, I guess you would say, by those that are unionized throughout the world, and that encompasses many, many professional unions everywhere.
And so you're throughout the world, but in the United States, where are those organizations located?
Well, the president that had just finished her term was an American, and she held that office for 10 years. In fact, she was a founder of the organization. That was Mary Hatwood Futrell, and she, previously to that, had been president of the National Education Association. So her office, even though she was in charge of Education International, she lived in the United States.
And do they have an international conference every year, or is
No,
it somewhat unusual?
No, it's every 3 years. And because of the numbers of regions that are represented and the numbers involved, it's just practically impossible to bring everybody together yearly.
Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How many delegates typically attend, or how many were at this one in Brazil?
Well, there were approximately between 1,500 and 2,000.
And representing how many different countries?
Well, it's actually by region, and the countries would have been around 170. And then there were 5 regions represented. And those break down into almost like the continents: Africa, Asia Pacific, Europe, Latin America, the United States, and the Caribbean.
And Joanne, how did you get selected to go to this conference?
Well, that's a good question. I had heard of EI, and that's Education International. I had heard of that through the National Education Association because of Mary Futrell, who had been president. And you are either nominated by a state or either by your position that you hold at NEA. And I have worked with a lot of international people. We have international guests. So I had an interest, and my interest really was to go and be an observer. However, I was chosen to be a delegate, and so that changed my role a lot.
Excellent.
I'm sure our staff is listening, and Joanne, what we're going to do now is visuals are always helpful to our viewers, and we have you had a lot more, but we took 5 of your wonderful photographs from your trip to the conference, and we're going to have them put them up on the screen, and if you'll watch the video, tell us what you're doing here.
Oh, well, this is actually in Rio de Janeiro, and it happens to be on the Copacabana. You can't, I'm off the boardwalk right now because it was very stormy, and if you look in the background, you will see the way to Ipanema. I'm sure you've all heard of the girl from Ipanema, and that is the sister and brother to Sugarloaf in the back.
That's a very nice photograph. And I believe you did digital work while you were there. Here's our next photograph.
And this one is in Portoalegre, and it is out in front of the governmental buildings, the palace and so forth.
Very, very nice photograph too, and we'll get the next one now.
And you can see that this is in front of the palace in Portoalegre where it was held. Our conference was fortunate enough to have Lula, President of Brazil, come and speak to us. And being the kind of person that I am, I heard there was a demonstration going on, and I wanted to know what it was. So after we had meetings, I went there. And these people are there for human rights, and they were hoping to get an audience, but I never did find out what happened. That's a Brazilian flag that you can see in front.
Yes. Okay, our next photograph.
This is a beautiful group of children. They played for us at the Education International Conference, and they're all different from different places within Brazil. And yet the conductor brought them together. They played typical Brazilian instruments and music, and it sounded so professional. And it was during the time that President Lula was there. I might add that it had a huge ceiling, a high ceiling in this, and there were these beautiful birds flying across the top while this was happening. And after it was over, who knows where they went? They were no longer there. So it was wonderful to see children at an adult function again, and I think that's the main reason why we were there anyway.
Well, that's certainly what you're all about, education of young people. And then the final photograph is with some of your, I guess, fellow delegates.
Those are delegates, and they are from the United States, and the gentleman on the left is from California. He was a delegate. And behind me from Minnesota. And to my left there is a gentleman from Connecticut and Las Vegas. Looks like Nevada on the other side. And we are. In this particular delegation, you use a card for voting. And of course, we are American delegates. We had 50. So we are just part of the group.
Well, thank you for bringing those along, because again, our viewers can have some idea of what it was like. I want to move into the substance of the conference. First of all, it was very exciting to have the President of Brazil. It shows the importance of your conference and the excitement of hearing from a leader of a country. But as she went through your days there and your agenda, I guess I have several questions on the panel. I'll give back to them in a minute, and then I'll do another round later. But what were some of the top items on the agenda that you were discussing during this conference?
Well, almost at any trade union gathering, you will find all of the interests that concern any of the unions. Workers' rights, anything that had to do with literacy around the world, children's rights, rights of the minorities and the poor, and the right for everyone to have an education, whether they're adults, whether they're children, but for people to be literate around the world. That was the main thrust of everything. Of course, we had regular business of candidates and delegates that were running for office. And this year we elected a new president. And that will be very interesting because he's from South Africa. And moving it from out of the hands of someone that was in the United States, I think we will see more of a global reach at this particular time. But many things came up, all of the world conditions that you would say that affect education, whether it was finance, whether it was abilities of teachers to be able to gather together to work on contracts, or whether working conditions came in light, whether or not people were suppressed or oppressed in different places.
Let me follow up on that one step. I know you had speakers, and I'm sure you had breakout sessions and working on different issues. As you heard the delegates talk from around the world, and that's almost like the United Nations, 170 countries. What surfaced as the greatest problems that might not be as much a challenge, like in this country, literacy would not be as great a challenge as in some countries, but what rose to the top as the greatest challenges that educators face around the world right now?
Well, I believe that some of the really important things, and they're also objectives of EI, is that we defend the right of teachers to have trade unions, and especially in some of the smallest towns and hamlets across the world, they are being discriminated against and having difficulties in even having fair wages and places where they can teach children. So working conditions was one thing, but the rights of teachers and the rights of students and other education personnel was discussed over and over again. Another thing that was really important was justice and peace, and that we have that around the world. That is something that everybody works for. Education International works with the World Bank and with World Health Organizations and international labor, and there was a time several years ago when they were you may have heard of the program Education for All, and UNESCO and those people were brought together through the United Nations, and this was to promote education through the world, and they set objectives and they had those happen, and for 3 years those objectives were being followed, but now it is the same thing. We've noticed a decline around the world, and we've also noticed a decline everywhere, that the lack of funding for education, and this is a public education.
So this has been a worldwide trend in recent years?
Right. The concerns that we have in the United States, or in our particular area, everywhere in our schools, the testing and the programs that have been set forth by governments and so forth have not been funded. And this is happening even in the poorest of countries, third world countries. And so they have a lot of difficulty in trying to carry out objectives now. And we've noticed that Educational for All, they have changed the deadline on that. It was supposed to end, and now it's going to 2015 because they aren't moving in that direction anymore. And it seems to be that way around the world from everybody that we spoke with.
Thank you, Janelle Burke.
I want to ask you some questions about literacy. I have a very dear friend who's interested in literacy, and can you tell us what are the differences between various countries regarding literacy?
The mind is all one, everywhere. The people that attend Education International have the same, the same idea wherever they are. Everybody wants people around the world to be literate, and they want even adults to have that opportunity. And they feel that one of our basic human rights when you are free is to have a free education, and an education that you can be, that is available to you.
And were there more women who were not literate? Do you find that in some countries women are discriminated against in terms of literacy?
That is true, and I know that I had more information on that because we did some numbers while we were there, and we heard a lot of the speeches, as Tony said, and they are women and girls are the ones that seem to be oppressed more in all countries.
And I want to ask you also, back to my first round of questions, what is the purpose of Education International?
Well, let me just tell you the objectives. I have them right here so that I remember that I'm new. When I was new, I was a first-time delegate, but to be very clear, EI defends the professional trade union rights of teachers and other education personnel, promotes all people's democracy, human rights, peace and social justice, and equality through the development of public education and quality education, combats all forms of discrimination in education and society, and fights for the rights of the vulnerable groups, just as we said, children, indigenous people, gays and lesbians, ethnic minorities, migrants, women and girls.
Thank you.
I think this would be a good time, and I know the staff's always listening. You also have a website that people are interested in knowing more about this particular organization. Maybe as I go to Erna, they'll put up the website, and then people could learn a lot on that site about this organization. Erna Reinhardt.
Joanne, I was intrigued with your comment about children's rights because I think in America we all take that for granted, and it's definitely an expectation that our children go to school. Could you give us some examples of where in the world that isn't quite the same as it is in America?
Well, we have a lot of work to do in that area worldwide. Africa, for one thing, the Caribbean, Asia Pacific, all of those areas. Latin America, especially Latin America. So many people are doing things and gifting other countries so that children can have books and supplies and so forth. But and even even in the United States, we have children that do not have equal opportunity. So we're very much concerned about that too.
And why is it in those countries? What are those children doing? Is it because the programs don't exist, or is it because they're part of the labor force, or why are they not in school?
Well, there are a lot of children that are working to support other members of their families. Many of the children have parents who have died because of either war, AIDS, or something that has occurred in a certain country. And those children are forced into labor, and they don't have either the adequate facilities or means at all, because they are working as a sole provider for a family.
And then can your organization, can Education International, can they influence and make some changes in those areas, or is your purpose more awareness and education?
It's both. It's both. The World Bank, like I said, and the World Health Organization, they are working very hard to fund programs in certain countries. We had the Vice President of World Bank spoke to us and told us what they are doing. That's the same thing with the World Health Organization, getting information in regards to health and to things that people can do in that country. But in different countries, they have, the Americans are there, and they are trying to promote programs, but right now it's a volatile time in the world, in different places. So we're finding a lot of our programs are either stifled at this time, and people are not traveling, or the funding isn't there.
Great.
Oftentimes one of the great benefits of a conference, and you and I have belonged to organizations where we've had conferences we've gone to in this country, and while at those, one of the richnesses of those meetings is exchanging ideas among the delegates that are there. And I'm sure that happened here. So my question is, in the exchange of those ideas, following the conference, are there ways that those educators will continue to communicate with one another between these 3-year conferences and share some ideas, or are there sometimes exchange of faculty where they can, how do you stay in touch? And how do you share this very vital resources of knowledge from one country to another one that after you've had those contacts at the conference?
We encourage teacher exchange, and I spoke to many people who have come to different countries, made that exchange, and maybe we're there for a month, sometimes 3 months, depending on what could be done. Right now, I have names of many, many people who would like to be here and be in the United States, and they would be glad to come. All they need is housing and a place to be, and they would exchange with faculty, or they would be glad to just be in the classroom as a resource. As I was leaving that last day, the people from Africa were all getting ready to leave, and they were in the airport at the same time, and it's amazing that they have done that, and they are still willing to come more, because it's very difficult for them to leave their own schools. The other thing is that we stay in contact, of course, with email, which is really great. We use that now. We have a resource there. We can have communication in that particular way. And there is another meeting that followed Education International, and it was a much more global aspect. And a lot of the people that sit on the board of Education International are also on other organizations. But we have reports all the time in the United States at National Education Association, and we communicate in that way.
So I assume from that you also, teaching materials and all, that you share some of those, and therefore that can expand the approach and technique to teaching.
We do that. Materials, it's amazing that in all these countries, everything is much the same. I thought perhaps because we were going to be having people there that were from, small rural communities, that the concerns would be different. They're not any different than what we have right now in the United States, or what we see as members of the National Education Association. The concerns are the same, the issues are the same, and everyone is trying to do the same thing by promoting peace and justice, to make sure that children have a right to learn, and that we can promote education everywhere.
One final question. at your conference, are your educators, delegates, all from what we'd call in this country public schools, or are there private schools involved, or academies? Or
They're both, but
Okay.
the basic group is public schools everywhere, and we do have some other organizations that belong, but it's basically public schools everywhere.
Yeah. Janelle Berg.
I want to ask a series of questions that are maybe not real long, but that have to do with special things that happened to you during the convention. The first one is, what is the high point of the convention for you?
Well, when you attend a lot of these conferences, I think people think that you go and you have a vacation. First of all, that's wrong. You're usually there on the floor of the delegation at least by 8 in the morning and seldom off the floor until 6 at night. And you either like doing those things or you don't go to those things, because that's what it is. I believe that the highlight was meeting people and the different educators, and I just I enjoy people so much, and I have no trouble talking to people. And it's pretty amazing, I guess, as Americans, we don't realize that people from other countries speak so many other languages.
Yes.
And that's, you don't have a difficulty in talking to anyone. In Brazil, the language there is Portuguese. But if you speak some Spanish and you speak some French and some English, you have no difficulty in talking to people. And I was so impressed with people from all of the different regions that spoke such fluent English. And English is a second language to most of them. And many people speak 3 and 4 languages. I think the United States is really behind in that respect.
I was going to say they speak 3 or 4 languages except Americans.
And my second question is, there must have been a person who piqued your curiosity or that you found of special interest. Describe that person for us, someone who was unique.
Oh, I can't think of just one person, I don't think, that was any different. I was impressed by some of the people that we interviewed. I happened to be placed on the elections committee, and as a newcomer, it would have been nice to have been able to just go and be on the floor every day. So I was pulled out of my group, and I would serve on that particular committee. And we interviewed all of the people that were running for offices, which was really a demanding job because it took a lot more time. But I think I was impressed with the Korean woman who was running for a regional seat. And she did not speak English. That was the one thing. And yet she came in with an interpreter who was a young man probably about 25 years old, and he spoke 6 languages, and he was fluent in every language. And I happen to know of some Korean only because I'm a special fan of the martial arts, and I have taken that, and so I knew some of the language. And they were just bowled over to think that I could even use Korean in the correct way. And I'm so thankful that I had a master that taught me language. But I think that she was so gracious in everything, and her answers were right on. They were just so perfect because we ask everyone the same questions of the candidates we were interviewing. But her response and her facial expression, you knew exactly pretty much what she was saying. As he was interpreting, she was speaking to us. And it was wonderful. I think that I would have to say she impressed me the most, and he did too.
Thank you.
Arnold Reinhardt.
Joanne, now that you went to the conference and you're back, I have 2 questions. Number one, is there an issue that you came away with that you became more aware of that you weren't aware of before you went on the trip? And number 2, is there a particular issue that now that you're home, you specifically want to work on?
Erna, I have been so lucky to work with the task force and to be on the State Human and Civil Rights Committee here and the National Committee for Human and Civil Rights. Many of those issues are the same ones that we have, and they're dear to my heart. The fight for global justice and peace, as I mentioned before, for human rights, the fight against all discrimination in every way, and standing together for education and educators so that their voices are heard, and especially listening and doing more for children.
Great.
I want to talk a little about structure with time coming to an end for this program, but the good news is you'll be back next week on another subject. The board, the governing board, is it pretty large? You and I have served on some boards together. Is it? I'm sure it's representative around the world, and do they meet on a regular basis, and do they bring about some policies between your conferences?
Right, they do. It's a large board. Depending on the number of delegates that you can have is by your membership wherever your country is. So as in the United States, where the National Education Association is almost 3 million membership. And by that, we had 50 delegates. And then there's a number of open seats that we can hold. So as I mentioned before, the president for the past years has been Mary Hatwood Futrell, who was from the United States. But we had another board member. We were open, and we had an open seat this year, but that was filled by a former president of the NEA, Bob Chase, and he was there. So that was it. There's a president, and this gentleman is from South Africa. There is a vice president from each of the regions, the 5 regions. There's a general secretary, and that position is being held by a gentleman from the Netherlands. And then there's the international seats of each of the regions. And in between the time that we have the meetings every 3 years, then they meet in different areas in regions.
And then that board has some regular meetings to deal with issues, but not just at the conference.
Right. And actually, there are no workshops. I think you mentioned there are no.
I thought there were. Yeah.
No, this is strictly the governance and the board and the business. There are resolutions that have been written and brought there by everyone.
And speakers at the conference.
And speakers, of course. But the resolutions come from all of the regions.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion.
Okay,
the clock always
all right.
wins here.
All right.
Joanne, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, the good news is that while Joanne was there, she was able to do a trip up the Amazon River, and we'll have her on next week to see that exciting trip, and she again has some great photographs for you. So hope you'll join us on that trip up the Amazon. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.